Pesachim, Dafim Yud Gimel through Yud Tes, on Daf Yud Gimel, Gemara brings a brisa. Arba Asher Shecholios b'Shabbos. When Erev Pesach, the 14th of Nisan, is on Shabbos, Mevarin es Hakol Mulafnei Shabbos. We do Bir Chametz before Shabbos on Erev Shabbos, which is the 13th of Nisan, as opposed to the 14th, which is the day we normally do B'dika and Bir Chametz on. The Shulchan Aruch brings this halacha when the 14th falls out on Shabbos, so we do B'dika the night of the 13th, and then we do beer before Shabbos. On the day of the 13th, before Shabbos, we do beer. We don't do beer on everything as we do in a normal year because you're going to eat some chametz on Shabbos. So you leave mazon shtei sudas, let's say on Shabbos, you leave food for 2 sudas for Shabbos. Suda shlishis, you're not going to be able to eat because Suda shlishis is going to be after the Zman Isser, so you can't eat chametz for Suda shlishis. So you leave over food for 2 sudas. And what do you do for Suda shlishis? The Shulchan Aruch says you're really stuck because you can't eat chametz because it's after the Zman Isser chametz on Shabbos Erev Pesach. You can't eat matzah because Chazal said you can't eat matzah on Erev Pesach. Elam matzah ashira. You have matzah ashira, which is considered, for Sfardim at least, it's considered mikra din matzah and not chametz, and therefore there's no issur of chametz. But it's not the kind of matzah of lechem oni that you can eat for the seder, and therefore you can eat that on Erev Pesach. So that's what you eat for Suda Shlishis according to the Shulchan Aruch, matzah ashira. But even that, you have to eat that before Shah Asiris. You shouldn't eat it too close to the evening, too close to the seder. The Ramah says, Our minhag Ashkenaz, we don't eat matzah shira. Medinos Elu, we don't eat matzah shira after the Zman Isser of Chametz either. So for us, we really have a hard time with Suda Shlishis. So we have to rely on peros, either fruits or basar v'dagim, fish and meat. That's what the Ramah says. The Mishnah Berurah explains that when we say you do the B'dika on when Erev Pesach falls down on Shabbos, you do the B'dika on the night of the 13th, you do it with a bracha and you do bittul as you do every year. The regular ceremony that normally is on the night of the 14th, this year is on the night of the 13th. And again, because you can't do B'dika closer to Pesach, because you can't do the beer, you can't do the B'dika on the day of the 13th, because we saw earlier in the Masechta that B'dika can't be done by sunlight, it has to be at night by candlelight. You leave over food for the chametz, for the first 2 sudas, for the Friday night suda, the 14th at night, and the 14th in the morning before Chatzos. The Achronim say, the Mishnah Berurah brings, you should daven early. And you shouldn't daven for a long time, because if davening goes too long, you get home late, you're going to run into the question of the Zman Isser. So we want to make sure people have enough time to eat their last chametz meal for Suda Shachris. So davening should be early and shorter than usual to make sure people don't have any problem with eating chametz after the Zman Isser. What do you do for Suda Shlishis? So we said the Mechaber says matzah shira, Sfardim, but for Ashkenazim you have peros or basar v'dagim. The truth is, Mishnah Berurah points out, there is a machlokus in general whether you can really fulfill the mitzvah of Suda Shlishis without eating bread, just with peros or basar v'dagim. It's a machlokus. We normally don't rely on that. Your person is supposed to eat bread. B'shas v'chak, you don't really have any other choice. On Erev Pesach, that's on Shabbos. So then, b'shas v'chak, you rely on the lenient view that you eat peros or basar v'dagim. Basar v'dagim is better, more of a substantial food, I imagine, than peros. Tavshil, knedlach, you make kosher for Pesach type of knedlach, of some kind of cooked dish out of matzah. It's also okay. It's not matzah, but it's that's also okay. But again, before Shah Asiris, we don't want you to eat it too close to if you eat knedlach, which is a more real food like matzah shira, you shouldn't eat that too close to the seder. You shouldn't eat it before. You have to eat that before Shah Asiris, before the 10th hour of the day. But peros and basar v'dagim, you can eat. You can eat later. The gzeira on eating before the seder doesn't apply to things that are not based on grain at all. However, even that, the Mishnah Berurah says you shouldn't eat too much. The usual rule, because you want you to eat matzah l'te'avon with an appetite on the night of the seder. The Achronim say a different solution, which we generally do, which is besides relying on peros and basar v'dagim for Suda Shlishis, you should really eat 2 sudas in the morning. You don't have that much time in the morning. You're not going to eat 2 full-blown sudas, but you take your regular Suda Shachris with chametz, break it into 2. So you wash and eat bread and eat some food, and then bench, take a break, and then wash and eat bread again, and do all that before the Zman Isser. So this way you'll be having 2 sudas before the Zman Isser. However, you have to wait in between. You can't just wash, eat bread, bench, immediately wash again, and eat bread again, because that's considered bracha she'ein tzricha. If you just bench and then wash right away and make hamotzi again, that's bracha she'ein tzricha. So you have to wait. Eze shahos, wait some delay in between. Mishnah Berurah doesn't define it. Some people say, I think, wait 20 minutes or a half hour. Some people go for a walk. You have to do something to make it not bracha she'ena tzricha. So when you do this procedure of Bedika and Biur Erev Pesach, you do Bedika the night of the 13th when Erev Pesach is on Shabbos, and Biur the day of the 13th. When do you do the Biur? Bedika you do the night of the 13th. When do you do the Biur? So better, the Shulchan Aruch says, better to do it before Chatzos, even though it doesn't really matter because you're doing it on the 13th. There's no Isser of Chametz on the 13th. Erev Pesach itself, you have to do it early because the Zman Isser comes. You want to do it before the Zman Isser, but here you're doing it Erev Pesach, Erev Shabbos, which is Erev Pesach. It really doesn't matter, but it's tov. The best thing to do is to do it before Chatzos. You shouldn't get mixed up with what you do every year. Shabur says Kodem Chatzos is not really, it's not precise. Kodem Chatzos means before the 6th, before the beginning of the 6th hour. That's when you really should do the beer, and do bittul also. You do bittul also that you're going to do bittul on Shabbos. You don't do bittul Erev Shabbos, even though you're doing beer Erev Shabbos, because it doesn't really make sense to do the final bittul on Erev Shabbos because you're saving chametz, you're saving the 2 sudas for Friday night and Shabbos day. So to do the beer you're going to do on everything except the chametz that you're saving on Erev Shabbos. But bittul you're doing on Shabbos. That's when you're finally getting rid of all the chametz. There's no point in doing bittul on Erev Shabbos because you're saving stuff. You're saving stuff for Shabbos anyway. The Gemara goes on in Yud Gimel. It brings a story of someone who had chametz, a diskia, a malei chametz, and it was a Jew's chametz, and it was getting closer and closer to Pesach. So he told him, wait. The shomer, the person who had custody of the chametz, the Rav told him, wait. Finally, when it got to Shah Chamishas, it was getting close to the Zman Isser, he told him, go sell it. That's time to sell it because you can't have chametz on Pesach, so a Jew can't have chametz anymore, so you have to sell it. This is how we paskin. That if a Yisrael has chametz of another Yisrael, again, if you can call up the owner and say, take care of your chametz, obviously you should do that. But if you can't get in touch with him, what do? You wait until Shah Chamishas, you wait until the 5th hour. The Mishnah says at the beginning of the 5th hour, you have to still have time to sell it. You wait until you have just 1 hour left, it's 11th hour as we say. So it's you wait until you have the last possible moment. If the owner is not around, you have to sell it. You sell it to a non-Jew. If you don't sell it, if you weren't able to sell it, you have to mevayir it. You have to do bir chametz then, because once his maneser comes, it's a Jew's chametz, you have to sell it even if you have no chiyuv achrayis. The Mishnah Berurah explains that the reason you have to sell it is because Meishav Aveda, a Jew has responsibility to other Jews to save his property from being lost or becoming worthless. And so ideally you wait till the last minute, so you can sell at the last hour. But if you think you won't be able to find a customer at the last moment, it'll be too late, then you sell it earlier. Then you can and should sell it earlier. You can and presumably should sell it earlier. Biur Halacha talks about what happens if you'll find customers, but the price won't be as good. You can only get 80 cents on the dollar if you wait till the last hour, but if you sell it earlier, you can get 90 cents or the full price on the dollar, so the Biur Halacha discusses that. Furthermore, the Mishnah Berurah brings that the Magen Avraham and the Achronim say that if you can sell it to a non-Jew the way we do it, where we're pretty comfortable, pretty confident we're going to get it back, you should do that. You shouldn't sell a full-blown sale because maybe the person wants to get his chametz back. So again, you're supposed to act in the best interest of the owner. So if you can sell it to that kind of sale, it's better than selling it in a sale that's expected to be permanent. Then the Mishnah Berurah brings a major machlokes achronim, which has ramifications for many other areas of choshen mishpat, of civil law as well. Let's say the person who was supposed to sell did not sell it. He failed, he was negligent, he didn't sell it. So there are 3 opinions. Some say chayev. Magen Avraham says chayev. You're a shomer, a custodian who's negligent. You have to pay for the damage that you caused and pay whatever the chametz is worth. Some say it depends whether you're a shomer chinam or a shomer sachar. The Chak Yaakov says a shomer chinam, who the standard is, if he's not being paid to watch, it's just a favor, the standard is gross negligence, pshia. This is not called pshia. But if he's a shomer sachar, if he's being paid to watch, he has a higher standard of fiduciary responsibility, and therefore he's chayav, even though this is not considered gross negligence. Most achronim say, the Mishnah Berurah says, there is no chiyuv at all. Even though it is negligent, it's unquestionably negligent to fail to sell the chametz. But the obligation, the liability of a shomer for not protecting the property of the principal, that's only if he could protect the property from destruction as opposed to letting it become lost or destroyed. Here, you can't save the chametz. The chametz is going to be asur. All you can do is save it and hope to raise some money. So you can't and hope to save money. So you can't save the chametz. So the obligation to sell it and to at least preserve his capital, since you're not preserving the thing itself, the chametz itself, you're not preserving, that you're still supposed to do that. It's Halachos Of the Daf. It's something that one Jew should do for another Jew. But that doesn't fit into the narrow responsibility of the shomer, and therefore, b'diavad, if he didn't do it, he did wrong. But he did wrong, but he wouldn't be chayav. He wouldn't be liable. The basic halacha here that the shomer is supposed to sell it, both because of Meishav Aveda, and even if he's not a shomer at all, he has to sell it because of Meishav Aveda. And there are two reasons. First of all, you have to sell it. First of all, you have to, besides saving a Jew from loss, you have to sell it because we don't want him to be over. We don't want him to get the avera of Bal Yirah. So the owner, wherever he is, if he owns the chametz on Pesach, he'll get an avera. So Kol Yisrael Arevim Zelazeh. So you have an obligation to help him avoid the avera. And the Vilna Gaon goes further. The Gra says that there's a chiyuv of Bal Yirah. Even though we know that if you have no achrayas, no responsibility, and you have a non-Jew's chametz, you're not over Bal Yirah. If you sell the chametz and then the non-Jew has the chametz in your house, you don't get Bal Yirah if there's no achrayas. But if it's a Jew's chametz and it's in your house, even if you have no achrayas, then the Gaon says that there's a chiyuv min Torah to do beer. So there are at least three reasons here potentially why you have to do beer. Why you have to. There's one reason why you should sell it in advance. Why you should sell it, or the halacha is you have to sell it before there's maneser, and if you fail to sell it by there's maneser, you have to do beer. The last few reasons we said were why you have to do beer. You have to do beer either because you want to avoid Bal Yirah, or because according to the Gaon, there's a chiyuv midaraisa. So you should sell it in advance. That'll avoid Bal Yirah and avoid Bal Yirah for you, for him, and it will save him money from Meishav Aveda. If you don't do that, and it is maneser and it's too late to sell, then you still have to be mavayir it for these two reasons. Either because Kol Yisrael Arevim Zelazeh and you want to save the owner from the Isser, or according to the Gaon, because you yourself have an Isser, since it's Chametz Shel Yisrael, B'Beiser Shel Yisrael. On Daf Yudalad, top of the Daf, we have a Gemara, begins on the end of Yud Gimel. Brisa says, Abba Shaul says, there were two cows that would be plowing on Haramishcha and Yerushalayim, and there was a simon that as long as they were both plowing, that was a way of broadcasting that they could still eat chametz. When one of the cows was removed from the plowing, only one cow would be plowing. That was tolin, la'ochlin, v'la'sarfin. They can't eat anymore. We discussed the actual hour, the 4th hour, 5th hour, 6th hour, and so on. They had the simon. They didn't have clocks. They had the simon. When one cow was taken away, no more eating, but they didn't have to burn it yet. Nitlu shteihen, when both cows stopped the plowing, everyone began, then they burned the chametz. So, Tosfos brings the Yerushalmi that, forget the question of chametz for a moment. The cows were plowing. They're doing malacha. How can they plow? Isn't Yerushalayim a makom shenagu not to do malacha? We see elsewhere in the Masechta there were different minhagim in Talmudic times, but doing malacha on Erev Pesach. The Yerushalmi takes for granted that Yerushalayim is a place that they did not do malacha. So the Yerushalmi says, okay, so they weren't really plowing. They were going through the motions. They looked like they were plowing. They were doing plowing motions. They weren't actually plowing. Why does the Yerushalmi assume that in Yerushalayim was a makom shenagu shel asas malacha? Tosfos explains that whatever Yerushalayim would have felt like doing in theory, in practice they couldn't do malacha, because since people would gather from all over the Jewish world, including from places where they wouldn't do malacha, therefore in Yerushalayim, which had a multitude of people from all over, they had to respect the people who were visiting, and they couldn't do malacha. This is brought here and there by the poskim. The Maril. Maril says in Germany he had bachrim who came from out of town and would be in his house, in his yeshiva, and the place they came from had different minhagim about what they would do. They had kulos and chumras. So the Maril has different rulings about what he would do. So in one place, the Maril used to say that even if there were kulos that the Maril was noheg in his city or his community, they were noheg. But if he had these bachurim, these students, these young men from other places, he wouldn't do those kulos. The specific kula was a type of chalev, different minhagim about which parts of the animal can be eaten and cannot be eaten. There are questions of chalev or not. So the chalev b'nei reinus, there was certain chalev, certain panchin, or certain parts of the animal that b'nei reinus used to eat. But Maril said in his house they wouldn't eat them because he had these bachurim from other places that didn't have those kulos, and therefore he wouldn't want to eat them because of this Tosfos, based on this Yerushalmi. Even if your minhag is to be makel on something, but if you have visitors, if you have people coming from all over, including those from places who don't have that minhag, you have to respect their traditions, and you have to not not rely on those kulos. Maril elsewhere says that that he was more lenient about this. It had to do with bedikas, certain types of bedikas we do on the animal after the shechita. He was more lenient, even though he had people from out of town and other minhagim. So the Magen Avraham explains that the two ideas: either that bedika is a question of tzina. You can't do things in public that people have different minhagim like that, but bedika is betzina because nobody knows what happens when the meat is prepared by the bodkin. That's not considered going against the minhag. Going against someone's minhag before Hesya. But the chaylev, if they see you eat this part of the animal, everyone knows what you're eating. You're eating whatever the part of the animal is that they didn't eat. That was for Hesya, and therefore he had to defer to the sensibilities of the people coming from out of town. Or the Magen Avraham says chaylev is nisar karis, so he was stricter about it. Bedikas is just an nisar lab, so it's less strict. Also a comment of the Sholem Eshev. The Sholem Eshev assumes that in Yerushalayim they would have actually kept Shnei Yom Tov and Shel Goliath, at least in the time of the Beis HaMikdash. The time where they had the Bnei Hagola would be in Yerushalayim, so they had to keep 2 days of Yom Tov. Even Yerushalayim, of course, is the one place in the world they normally wouldn't want to keep 2 days of Yom Tov. They didn't have to, like they don't today. But in the time where Kol Bnei Hagola were Mitzuyin in Yerushalayim, I don't know if this would apply today, where half the Jewish world visits Yerushalayim for Pesach and Shavuot and Sukkot. But at least in the time, the Sholem Eshev says that when they had Bnei Hagola in Yerushalayim, then even in Yerushalayim they had to keep 2 days of Yom Tov. And that's so beginning from Daf Yudalid through Daf Yutes, through the rest of the Dafim in today's shir, the Gemaras are almost exclusively about Tumah and Tara. So we found one thing on Yudalid. We'll pick a few more points in the Gemaras in the next few Dafim that deal with halachas that are relevant Bizman Hazeh, even though most of Tumah and Tara is not. On Daf Tezvav, in the course of discussing the laws of Tumah and Tara, the Gemara brings a halacha, pas she'ipsha, you have bread that's spoiled, that became moldy, and it's nifsla milech adam. It's no longer fit for human consumption, but v'akelav yachal achla, but a dog can still eat it. It's in terms of the laws of Tumah and Tara, it still is considered ochel, food, and it has the status of Tumah that apply to food. And when it's referenced in Matmei Pesach and you burn it on Pesach, it's considered chametz. So the Rishonim, the Rif infers from this Gemara, from other Gemaras, the Rif says that we see that it's only considered food for Tumah, for Pesach, as long as, even though it's nifsla milech al adam, a person can eat it, but it's still suitable for dogs. The Rif says, but if even a dog can eat it, it's totally inedible, not fit for canine consumption. It does not need to be destroyed on Pesach. You're allowed to keep it around on Pesach, and the halacha is you're even allowed to use it on Pesach. You don't eat it, but you're allowed to use it for anything. It's not considered chametz anymore. If you eat it, then it's a question of achshevek. But if you don't eat it, then you can keep it around on Pesach. You don't have to destroy it. You don't have to sell it, and you can even use it on Pesach. That's how we paskin in the Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch says pas she'ipsha. Once it's nifsla milech al hakelav, ein chayav levar. You don't have to destroy it. The Mishnah Berurah says that's only if it was already reached this stage of inedibility before the Zman Isser. If it was still edible at the time of Zman Isser and then it became not suitable, then you still have to destroy it. You don't have to destroy it if it reached the stage before the Zman Isser of Einerei Lachilas Kelev. It's like Afra Ba'alma, it loses the status of chametz. But as long as it's still edible by dogs, even if a person can't eat it, then you are chayav levair. It's considered chametz gam. In the discussion of the Divrei Malkiel, century ago, on selling chametz, where he gives a lot of details on how machirat chametz should be done, he says when we authorize the rabbi to sell the chametz, he says you write a harsha and you say you should sell all kinds of chametz, including different things that are found in pharmacies and cosmetics. You should sell those. Not just that you shouldn't use those on Pesach. You should even sell those. And he explains in his notes. He says why. L'chara, the stuff in those cosmetics and medicines and the pharmacy shelves is not suitable for achilas kelev. So he has a major chumrah. He explains nifsla me'achilas kelev, that it loses the status of food, that it's like afra ba'alma, is only if it is not edible because it's spoiled, because it's degraded and spoiled and bad, and that's when it loses the status of chametz. However, he says something which just dogs don't eat. He says, but you can process it and separate out the ingredients, or you can rehydrate it, put water in, and then you'll be able to eat it. It's called food. Gives an example. He says strong liquor. You can have liquor which is really, really strong and concentrated. very high alcohol. A dog won't eat it. Even a human can't drink it. It's too concentrated. It's too intense. You can tell me that it's not food? Of course it's food, he said. The fact that it needs to be prepared and reconstituted into a form that we can eat, that doesn't make it not food, he says. Therefore, he says, when we talk about medicines and cosmetics, it's true there are some things that are completely not edible and no form of preparation will make it edible. That's true, he says. But there are things that just need preparations and need this type of dilution or processing, and those things have the status of chametz. You even have to sell them. Rabbi David Heber for the Star K, he writes that Mikra Din, we paskin that anything that's not roi for a dog, you don't have to sell. It could even be used on Pesach. That includes all cosmetics, soaps, ointments, creams, he says. But he says people have minhagim. There's a minhag that people don't use these types of things on Pesach for a variety of reasons. He doesn't say you sell them, but he says people don't use them for a variety of reasons. He has about a half dozen different reasons why people might not want to use chametz, even chametz that's not suitable achilas kelev. First of all, he mentions a svara that is similar to the Divrei Malkiel. He says many poskim say that something which can be reconstituted, denatured alcohol, it can be renatured, restored to regular alcohol. Some say that you shouldn't use that chametz. That you shouldn't use such products. Bir Halacha says in the name of the Gra that soap that's treif, they used to make soap from animal fat, you shouldn't use, even though you're allowed to have hanar from treif food, but rubbing it on your skin is sicha kishtia. It's like ingesting it, it's like drinking it. Even though we're not machmer all year, but for Pesach some people are machmer. Some say that if the chametz has a good fragrance, even if you can't eat it, but if it's made for fragrance, it still has some utility. It's not ruined yet. So deodorants and things that have a good smell then would be a problem on Pesach. Some say that some worry that you might ingest some of these things. Lipstick, things that you put on your lips, it might be ingested. Again, mikra din is still mutter because it's not royal achilas kelev and you're not being machshavit to eat it. But some people, some women don't even want to have Yisrael Kedoshim. Some women don't even want to ingest even a mashu of chametz. He brings their mouthwash and toothpaste. Again, they're nifsal mechilas kelev, but some say that they're going in your mouth, so you don't want to do that. In general, people are very machmer. Even when there's achilas kelev, even when they're nifsal mechilas kelev, many people are machmer that they don't want to use at least any items on Pesach, even if the nifsal mechilas kelev, because of these various reasons and maybe other reasons. Again, the Divrei Malkiel goes so far as to say that things which can be reconstituted and rendered fit for human consumption and are not degraded, he says, yeah, you should even sell those things, but certainly not to use them. Apparently, the Roman Haggim, people don't use them for a variety of reasons. On Daf Tazayin, the Gemara talks about the tzitz. The tzitz, the forehead plate of the Kohen Gadol. It says the tzitz is maratzah. The Torah says the Kohen Gadol wears the tzitz and he provides ritzui, atonement for certain avera. What kind of avera? So the Gemara brings one brisa that says al adam ve'al abasar ve'al chelav shenitma, different types of kachim that became tamei, and avodah was done with them, that the tzitz is maratzah for that. Another brisa, v'nasa Aaron is avona kadashim. Aaron, when he wears the tzitz, he atones for the avera involving kachim. Chi'eza avon hu no say what avera. The Gemara says, the brisa says, avon tuma shehutra mechlal b'tzibur. We're talking about tuma that was hutra b'tzibur. The tzitz is maratzah for that avera. It's mutter, tuma hutra b'tzibur, it's mutter lechatchila, but you need the tzitz to be maratzah. An interesting halacha l'maisa application of this. In the 19th century, there was a great controversy over the possible reinstitution of karbanos, of the sacrificial order b'zman hazeh. Can we bring karbanos? You don't need to make some mikdash. Can we bring karbanos b'zman hazeh? There was a tremendous debate. Those who were opposed raised about a dozen different reasons why there were halachic problems with this. Those who were in favor, Tzvi Hirsch Kalisher, had answers for all these objections. So one of the objections that was raised was by Rabbi Kiva Eger of Kalisher's Rebbe. So in a letter to his son-in-law, the Chasim Sofer, Rabbi Kiva Eger wrote, we can't identify the stones that you need for the choshen, for the ephod of the Kohen Gadol, and therefore we can't have big day kahuna of the Kohen Gadol. Rabbi Kiva Eger doesn't really explain what he means by that. Who needs a Kohen Gadol? We don't need, it's nice to have one, but you don't need a Kohen Gadol to bring most karbanos. For Yom Kippur, you need a Kohen Gadol, but for certain avodas, but for the avodas of Yom Kippur, for certain avodas with big days of, But for regular karbanos, for Karban Pesach, for ordinary karbanos, you don't need a Kohen Gadol. So why do we have to have stones for the ephod and the choshen? So the Shelas David explains that since Tumah is Dechuya B'tzibur, since we paskin Tumah is Dechuya B'tzibur and not Hutra, that means it's mutter, but it needs ritzui tzitz. You need the tzitz. For the tzitz to work, the tzitz to be operational, it has to be on the forehead of the Kohen Gadol. The Gemara discusses al metz chamarata, but you have to have the tzitz on the forehead of the Kohen Gadol. That means he has to be a valid Kohen Gadol, and he has to wear the 8 begadim. If he doesn't wear the 8 garments of the Kohen Gadol, then the tzitz is not going to function. Since we don't know the stones of the ephod and the choshen, they talk about tchelos as well, but since we don't have the stones of the ephod and the choshen, we don't have a proper, technically valid ephod and choshen, therefore we don't have a proper Kohen Gadol, therefore we don't have the tzitz, and therefore we're not going to have ritzui for the Tumah Hutra B'tzibur. Since Bisman Hazeh we're all tamei, the proposals to bring karbanos rely on Tumah Hutra B'tzibur, which requires lahalacha ritzui tzitz. We can't have a tzitz without a Kohen Gadol, we can't have a Kohen Gadol without big day kahuna, we can't have big day kahuna of a Kohen Gadol without the stones of the ephod and the choshen. That's based on the ideas in this Gemara that Tumah Hutra B'tzibur requires ritzui tzitz. On Daf Yud Zayin, the Gemara says that water, even a revius of water, its status is different from blood. We're discussing the tumah of liquids that were found in the Beimid B'chaya. The Gemara says water, if there's a revius, is more lenient because chazi lahatpul ben machtim v'tinaros. Abelo havi revius tmeim. A revius of water is suitable for tefillah, for dipping in small things that can fit in a revius. Needles and little things can fit into a small few ounces of water, so that water has a special status. Tosfos raises a question. The raises a question. Rabbeinu Yitzchak Baal Tosfos, he asks that, what do you mean water is suitable to dip things in, to be valid for tefillah? But we know a mikvah can't have mayim she'uvim, it can't have water that passed through vessels. This water, the Ri says, was mayim she'uvim. So what do you mean it's roy lahatbil? It's mayim she'uvim. You can't have mayim she'uvim for tefillah. So the Ri therefore concludes, based on this as well as other rayas, the psul of mayim she'uvim is midrabanan. Even though there are chazals, Taras Kohanim, that bring drushes for it, though those are asmachtas, the Ri says. The Ri said the entire psul of mayim she'uvim, which is one of the key problems in a mikvah, all that is only midrabanan. Why the chazal gozer it? The gzeira is you might try to be tovel in kalim, not in a mikvah at all, and that's certainly daraisa. But if you pour mayim she'uvim into a hole in the ground, even though the water is she'uvim midaraisa, that's fine. Midrabanan, the entire problem is midrabanan. This is a major debate in Rishonim in various places. There are a variety of shitas. You have the shita of the Ri, which is also the shita of the Rabbi Yosef ibn Migash and the Gaonim, according to some traditions, and the Rambam, who all say that the psul of mayim she'uvim is only midrabanan. But as opposed to that, there are other Gedolei Rishonim who said that the psul of mayim she'uvim is midaraisa. You have the shita Rashi's mashma that way, the Rashbam, Rabbeinu Tam, and a number of Rishonim said it was daraisa. And some say it's and the Ri and others say, the Rambam say it's drabanan. Some Rishonim have compromises. The Ravid says that if it passes through a kli without human action to pour it and to transmit it, that's midrabanan. But if a person fills up a bucket of water and pours it in, that's midaraisa. Rabbeinu Shimshon says that if it was she'uvin in a kli that's makabel tumah, like a metal jar or a metal cup or a wooden keli, that's midaraisa. But she'uvin in a kli that's not makabel tumah midaraisa, like a kli made out of unfired earthenware and so on, that's midrabanan. Lahalacha, the Shulchan Aruch doesn't clearly paskin which way. The Mechaber himself doesn't clearly paskin whether it's deraisa or drabanan. The Ramah says that if the Ramah paskins, if the entire mikveh is she'uvin, it's pasal min haTorah. But if most of the mikveh is kosher and a miyut is she'uvin, that's midrabanan. So the Ramah paskins like the stringent view that she'uvin itself is deraisa. But even the Ramah agrees that if most of the mikveh is not she'uvin, it's only a miyut that's she'uvin, that's midrabanan. Tremendous nafkamina, of course, of all this is the usual nafkamina. What do you do with makom safek? If you have a safek she'uvin, what's the halacha? So the Ramah paskins, and the Achronim seem to follow the Ramah, that when it comes to a mikvah which is a safek she'uvin, so it depends. If the safek is on the entire mikvah, then that's a safek deraisa, and that you have to be machmir. But if most of the mikvah is kosher, but you have some she'uvin, enough that they'd be possible if they were Vadei Shuvin, but now it's only a Safek. So in such a case, we say Safek Rabban Lakula. But according to the Ri on our Sigya, any Shailin Shuvin Lachara would be Safek Lakula, because the entire Psul of Shuvin is only a Psul Midrabban. On Daf Yudches, the Gemara again still discussing Tumah and Tara with regard to liquids. The Gemara talks about the notion of Mashkes Aruach. The Gemara says, if you have a liquids normally are Makabel Tumah and they're Makshir Lekabel Tumah, but a Mashkes Aruach, something which is spoiled and foul and unwholesome, is Mashkes Aruach, and it is not Makabel Tumah, as Rashi says, the Taras Kohanim Darshins, V'chol Mashka Asher Yishaseh V'chol Kli Yitma. Mashkin has to be potable in order to become Tameh, but Mashkes Aruach, which is not potable, is not Makabel Tumah, is not Makshir Lekabel Tumah. So again, we don't really practice the laws of Tumah and Tara today generally, but there's an interesting intersection between this and the laws of Kashrus. In Kashrus, we have a similar idea of Nosin Tam Lefgam, the idea that something that gives a bad taste is not Asr. Even the Isser itself, if the Isser itself is foul and inedible, earlier we talked about Nifsal Mechilas Kelab, there is in general a din that something which is not edible and is foul loses the status of Isser. So there, Rosh Zalman Auerbach has a question. He says that the Rambam Paskins, that the Shiva moving to Tumah for a moment, the Rambam says there are 7 mashkim that are Machshir Lekabel Tumah, but only if they're not Tzruchim. As per our Gemara, a mashka only has the status of mashka if it's not Saruach. Mashka Saruach is not Machshir. But elsewhere, the Rambam says that snot and air secretions, these types of things from the nose and the air, are considered mashkim and they're Machshir Lekabel Tumah. They're pretty gross. Rosh Zalman asks that they're pretty mos. So why don't we say it's Mashke Saruach? So Rosh Zalman therefore says, you see the standard of Saruach is a pretty strict standard. Even secretions from the nose and the airs are not considered Saruach. Therefore, Rosh Zalman says, he was Mesupuk whether royal jelly. Honey is delicious. Bees make honey, that's delicious. Royal jelly is apparently not so tasty. Poskin had a great debate about whether royal jelly is kosher like honey or is not kosher. There are various factors involved. One of the questions is, can we be lenient about royal jelly because it's Saruach? Rosh Zalman said that if even stuff that comes out of a person's nose and ears is not considered Saruach, so you can't say royal jelly is Saruach, and therefore Rosh Zalman held that it was a question of Isser, and he was only lenient for a chola, but for an ordinary person, Rosh Zalman held you can't eat royal jelly. But Tzitz Eliezer, on the other hand, was lenient on royal jelly. He says it's bitter, it's mar kalana, it's not edible, he says, and it's mutter. What about the question of mashkes aruach? Rosh Zalman says that even the secretions of the nose and the ears is not considered saruach. So how can you tell me royal jelly is saruach? So one of the answers they bring, say from Mishnah Acharona, says a similar question to Rosh Zalman. Urine is considered a mashke. But mashkes aruach is not makabel tumah. So why is urine considered a mashke? So the Mishnah Acharona says that it's true that our Gemara tells us the rule is mashkes aruach is not considered a mashke. That's midaraisa. But midrabanan, the idea that meraglayim is machshir is only midrabanan. And similarly, all the mashkim hamausim, the stuff from the ears and the nose, all that is really not machshir lekabel tumah midaraisa. Midrabanan it's machshir, but midaraisa, all these things, even so, these things that come out of the ears and the nose and are pretty not really edible, even though we find certain chumras that they're considered mashke, but it really is mashke saruach, and they're really therefore not makabel tumah midaraisa, and it's only a chumra midrabanan. So now, with regard to royal jelly, we would have to consider whether this chumrah of considering it enough of a mashke to be makabel tumah, would that chumrah apply to royal jelly or not? But midaraisa, at least, according to this interpretation of the sugya, anything which is saruach, even the saruach of stuff in the nose and stuff in the ears and urine, is all mashke saruach and does not have the status of a mashke to makshul makabel tumah, to makabel tumah itself. It's just a chumrah midrabanan, at least like a tumah and tara, to treat these things as mashke. On Daf Yutes, the Gemara says that if you have a needle, if the needle is tamei meis, so the Gemara says we apply the rule of halal cherev harei kechalal. The Torah discusses a halal cherev being tamei. Chazal have a drasha. Halal cherev kipshuto means a human corpse, someone who was killed by a sword. But the Gemara makes a drasha cherev harei kechalal. In halacha, we treat the sword as the deceased human itself. Cherev Harei Kechalal, a mace is considered a Via Vosa Tuma. The Cherev has the same status. There is a great deal of debate in the poskim to what extent does this analogy really hold? To what extent is the Cherev really exactly like a mace itself? There's machlokas, a famous machlokas between Rabbeinu Chaim Kohen and Rabbeinu Tam, whether a Kohen is not allowed to become tamei to a mace, whether a Kohen is allowed to come into contact with a Cherev Harei Kechalal, with a metal keli. The parameters of what is a Cherev are debated. Some say it's only the actual sword that killed the mace. Our Gemara seems to say, and most poskim say, that any metal item, like a needle, has a status of Cherev Harei Kechalal. Some say even non-metal items, but certainly, at least metal items, even non-Cherev, our Gemara seems to say is Cherev Harei Kechalal. So at least with regard to metal items. So the question is, is a Kohen allowed to come into contact with a metal item that was tamei to a mace? So Rabbeinu Tam says that a Nazir has rules of tumah also, that a Nazir is not allowed to become tamei mace, and if he does, he has to shave his hair and start his count again. And there's a klal that we Rishonim bring that not all tumos is a Nazir megalech alav. The Gemara makes it clear that certain kinds of tumah don't interrupt the Nazir's count, and there's a rule in Maseches Machos, any tumah that a Nazir is megalech alav, a Kohen is musar alav. A Kohen also is not musar in all kinds of tumah. A Kohen is only musar. The lav is only a subset of tumas mace, and the subset is the same for Nazir and Kohen. Anything a Nazir is megalech alav, a Kohen is musar not to become tamei. So Rabbeinu Tam said that Cherev Harei Kechalal, a Nazir is megalech. If a Nazir touches a metal item like the needle in our Gemara, which is Cherev Harei Kechalal, then the Nazir is megalech. Rabbeinu Chaim Kohen asked Rabbeinu Tam, "Eze bayis asher tivnuli." A little biblical militzi says, "Where am I supposed to go? What house can I enter anymore?" He says, "Every house has some kind of needle that was once in an ohel mace, that was once tamei to a that became tamei in an ohel mace." And according to you, Rabbeinu Tam, Cherev Harei Kechalal, a Nazir is megalech, which means that a Kohen is musar, so that I can't go into any house that has a needle that was once in an ohel mace, a nail or a needle. So what Rabbeinu Tam would answer to this question is not clear, but Rabbeinu Tam seems to hold that a Kohen is musar on Cherev Harei Kechalal, and Rabbi Chaim Kohen says absolutely not. A Nazir is not megalech, and a Kohen is not musar on Cherev Harei Kechalal. How do we paskin? So the Shulchan Aruch brings the Ramah. The Mechaber doesn't discuss it. Beis Yossi brings different opinions. The Mechaber doesn't discuss it. The Ramah says Yesh Omrim, the Shita of various Balei Tosfos, the Kolbo, the Sefer Yereim, the Shuvas Rashba, B'Shem some of the Balei Tosfos, that the Kohen is Muzar, the Kohen is Asur to become Tamei from Cherev Harei Kechalal. Yesh Mekilim. The Shita, but some Rishonim say no, Tosfos B'Shem the Rabbi, that there's no Isur of Cherev Harei Kechalal for a Kohen. The Ramah says the minhag is to be mekil, the ein is haramisa. We pass like Rav Chaim Kohen that the Kohen is not musar on Cherev Harei Kechalal. There's another machlokes Rishonim whether you say Cherev Harei Kechalal in an ohel or not. That some Rishonim say Cherev Harei Kechalal extends to an ohel, and the other Rishonim say not. Rav Chaim Kohen, who was worried about going into a house that had a Cherev Harei Kechalal, sounds like he was going that you do say it ba'ohel, but that's also machlokes. But la halacha, we paskin that a Kohen is not musar on Cherev Harei Kechalal. So b'zman hazeh, we don't have tumah and tara for anything except Kohen really. So b'zman hazeh, a Kohen doesn't have to worry. If either minhag we have, a Kohen is allowed to go into an ohel or even touch a cherev that was used to kill a mace, even though the cherev is Harei Kechalal, the Kohen is not musar from that kind of tumah. This was the subject of this is the idea behind a famous, brilliant, clever solution by Rav Shlomo Goren to allow a Kohen to become tamei if he wants to go to medical school, to learn anatomy. That the poskim have a very hard time finding a solid heter for a Kohen to attend medical school if he has to practice anatomy, if he has to study anatomy. Most poskim say the Kohen is not allowed to attend medical school. But Rabbi Goren had a heter. He says, let the Kohen find a Cherev Harei Kechalal. He'll take a metal necklace or a bracelet that became tamei mace, that was in contact with the mace, so it became tamei. Kohen's allowed to touch that because our minhag is that Cherev Harei Kechalal, a Kohen is not musar. Let the Kohen wear the metal item around his neck or on his wrist. So now the Kohen is in constant contact with tumah, and that's mutter. Now, says Rabbi Goren, the Kohen can go into an ohel mace because the Kohen's already Tameh. Even though we're Machmer that a Kohen who became Tameh once is not allowed to become Tameh again, all of our Kohanim are Tameh, but they still don't attend funerals, they don't visit cemeteries, because we pass in a Kohen is not supposed to be Mosif Tumah. However, while the Kohen is actively touching the Tumah, he's actually touching the Tumah, then there's certainly no Isser, Rabbi Garin says, according to most poskim, except the Rambam, according to most poskim, there's no Isser at all of the Kohen then becoming Tameh a second time once he has Tumah, once he's right now at this very moment in contact with Tumah. So normally the Kohen is being over for the first Tumah, so you have to stop that Tumah. But says Rabbi Garin here, the first Tumah is mutter. The bracelet, the necklace is mutter, because our minhag is like Rabbi Chaim Kohen. There's no Isser of Chayav Halal for a Kohen. But L'maaseh, it is absolutely Tameh. So once Rabbi Garin says you can have it both ways. It's mutter for him to touch that bracelet, but once he's touching it, it's mutter for him to touch a real mace as well. So we can basically finesse a way to completely abrogate the whole law of Tumas Kohen. So the Kohen can go to school and attend anatomy classes as long as he does so while he's wearing this bracelet and while he's in contact with this metal item. Of course, most poskim reject this. Moshe has a discussion. He tries to explain why this is not correct. He takes for granted this is not correct. Poskim have various reasons why they don't like this. Or Rabbi Garin is a Das Yachid about this. Rav Asher Weiss has a couple of reasons why he thinks. He calls this an Eitzah Maful Peles, a clever idea. Rav Weiss has two reasons why he thinks this is not a good solution. He says, first of all, he says that the whole idea that once a Kohen is in contact with Tumah, there's nothing wrong in touching Tumah a second time. It's because he's Mechol V'Amei. The Kohen is not supposed to defile himself, but if he's already defiled, there's no additional defilement, certainly if he's already defiled right now. Says Rav Weiss, but logically, if we apply Svara to this, that means if the first Tumah is considered Chilul, then there's no Chilul of the second Tumah. But if the first Tumah is Mutter, he says, if the first Tumah is Mutter, you can't call that Chilul. If it be Chilul, he wouldn't be allowed to do it. If he's allowed to touch the Cherev Harei Halal, like Rav Chaim Kohen, not like Rabbeinu Tam, then it's, if he's allowed to touch the first Tumah, that's not Chilul. So you can't call him Mechul V'Am, and you can't have it both ways. It's inherently illogical to say that you can have it both ways. You can say it's mutter because that would mean it's not Chil. If it's not Chil, then he's not Mechul V'Am. So fundamentally, this is the common sense flaw in Rabbi Garin's approach. Rav Weiss says that L'chara, he doesn't have proof for this, but he says L'chara, this is against the whole logic of the idea of Mechul V'Am. Second objection Rav Weiss has is that the halacha is that if the second Tumah is more stringent in some way or other than the first Tumah, then it's Asr. The whole heter, Mechol V'Amid, is you're not adding anything. Whatever you're doing the first time, you're doing the second time. That's Pashut. Rav Weiss says that if the second Tumah adds to the first Tumah, it would be Asr. So Rav Weiss says that he himself raised the question of whether conceptually Cherev Harei Halal is considered Tumas Meis itself. It's absolutely the same as Tumas Meis, whether it's a new Tumah, that's why it has certain leniencies. Some Rishonim say you don't need Hazah of the Paraduma on the third day and the seventh day. Other leniencies some of the poskim have. We discussed the leniencies, whether it's Tamei Ba'ohel. So Rav Weiss says, according to some poskim, Cherev Harei Halal is not the same thing as Tumas Meis. We treat it like an Aviyavas Tumah for certain purposes, but it's less stringent in certain ways. It's not exactly the same thing as bona fide, actual, literal Tumas Meis. Therefore, says Rav Weiss, if we allow him to become Tamei from the Cherev, that's because we say it's not as strict and it doesn't need Hazah, Gimel, V'Zayin. Rav Weiss tries to make these various disputes Tali Zebazeh. If you treat it as Tumas Meis Mamish, you need Hazah on Gimel, V'Zayin, and it would be awesome for the Kohen to come in contact. If you treat it as a new Tumah, it could be less strict, and you don't need Hazah, Gimel, V'Zayin on the third and seventh day, and the Kohen could become Tamei. Since we're allowing the Kohen to become Tamei, that means we're not treating it to be exactly as strict as actual Tumas Meis. And therefore, you're not going to call that Mechol V'Amid because the new Tumah is real Tumas Meis, and that's stricter. And once again, Rav Weiss says that Nafal Pita Babira, that's another reason why Rabbi Garin's Eitzah would not be halachically acceptable.